Welcome back, everybody, to Let's Discuss. Today, we're going to be talking about finishing second. As always, I'm your host, Freeman Beal, stress management coach and entrepreneur, and with me is Keenan Hart, mental advocate and co-founder of the telehealth company Francis. So, finishing second is interesting, and I want to start off really quickly and say that this is, I think, a problem in society where we have, and we've talked about this in the past, an issue between this or that, black and white, bad and good. And I think this is a huge example of that problem.
We live in a winner-take-all society. You know what I mean? And that's not just like a local society, that's a global society. So I want to kick us off here by thinking about the World Cup last year. If you watch the World Cup, you know how exciting it was. We saw Lionel Messi, depending on where you're from, take a World Cup championship. France lost. Now, something very interesting to me happened. When I was watching the celebration, I saw how happy Argentina was for winning the World Cup. I saw how disheveled and distraught France was when they came in second place. I thought that was very interesting because the entire French team, when they got up onto the stage, they didn't even pose for a picture as a team. And when that happened, I naturally started thinking about the 85-year-old soccer players from France who would have looked back at that World Cup second place and would have been disappointed because they didn't celebrate how much they accomplished in that moment. And I think that's a huge issue with our winner-take-all society. It's like Ricky Bobby, if you're not first, you're last. And we act like all the work, all the sacrifice, all the moments we shared as a team in a team sport weren't valuable because we didn't come home with the piece of gold around our neck. And I think that that is a huge mistake that we need to really start focusing on.
100%. And I think that last bit there that you said we have to start focusing on, I think is really part of it, because this goes back to something I'm really passionate about, which is perspective. And that's really starting to ask yourself the question of like what is winning, right? I do this all the time, and we've talked about this as well, but like I often do this too, where it's like, oh, I didn't get XYZ thing. I haven't achieved a certain goal. Like, what does it mean really for you to be winning? And I think that's where we begin to understand that this necessarily is a larger problem than just what we're going to talk about here about being first and last. But to kind of go off of that, what you were saying there between the first and second place, I remember that very well. The World Cup, watching it, and I posted about it just the day after, I think, celebrating not Argentina but also France for getting there. And there's all these interesting bits about that particular thing, and they were analyzing footage from 1992, the Olympics in 1992, and they judged it, and predominantly those who have finished second place look the most unhappy, even more so than those who finished in third place, because the second place people were going, oh, why didn't I get gold? And the third place people were going, like, I could have not made podium.
Yep.
And that's why it's really about perception. And that to me was like, this is a perception problem.
That's the entire conversation today. And I'm getting the chills as you talk about it, because I often talk about this in my social circles when I'm watching tournaments. It's like, why is it that the second place team who gets a silver medal or the big number 2 thinks they lost it all, but the third place team who beats the number 4 feels like they won a championship? You know what I mean? And so it's got to be that perception aspect of kind of like how we finish and how we validate our last move, if you will, that I think we need to do a better job of kind of re-preparing. One of the things that I naturally started going to when you were talking was an amazing book. If no one's read it yet, they should really listen to it. It's called Mindset by Carol Dweck. She is the Stanford professor who really pioneered growth mindset. And she contributes a growth mindset as being a mindset that gives us the ability to be successful long-term, because it's not based on a result. It's based on the process of growth. And so she talks about, even in school, as an example, we spend so much time being, from a previous conversation where we talked about that binary mindset of either success or failure, rather than how much did I grow during this process? Although I might not have achieved the goal, I still grew and still developed and still progressed in my life. And that's very interesting to me.
Yeah, it's interesting because I think it falls back on, you touched on it there, like how we perceive education And even how we're raised, and this is where I think things can begin to change. And if you follow Gary Vaynerchuk at all, you may have heard him say this, but he was like, part of the reason I am the way I am is because my mom didn't just celebrate the big wins with me. She cheered like I'd won the Super Bowl when I held the door for somebody. And that's part of the problem. And for myself, with a small kid on the way right away here, something that I want to be aware of is that when my child does something, regardless of how big or small it is, it's the same sort of impact and response. I give them that positive affirmation because what happens is, and this gets trained into our brains, and I'm not saying that parents do this on purpose, but we will generally give negative feedback when something doesn't happen the way we want it to, and only give positive feedback when something happens that we think should happen. And that's where I begin to think we can start to make some serious change, both as parents, but as teachers in education systems, is celebrating everything almost.
And I think there's a dichotomy that we see a lot today on social media. Gary Vaynerchuk, we've talked about him a couple times in different episodes, where he presents the idea of eighth place trophies, right? Eighth place trophies in themselves may not be the best thing to celebrate,
Yeah.
right? The ability to apply yourself to try and get something is what we should be celebrating. And whoever won first place deserved to win first place. But when you're being rewarded for winning an eighth place, a seventh place, a sixth place trophy, you know what I mean? It doesn't make the victory as rewarding as it should be. And the victory in itself is something that, like you touched on there, we need to do a better job of redefining what a win really is, right? The saying on social media is a win's a win. You know what I mean? When you're trying and applying yourself to the best of your ability towards accomplishing something, that in itself is a win. It's not always the end result, but if we fall in love with the process, the doing, then you can really start to become super dangerous. And Gary always talks about that. He's like, I was bred to win. My mom encouraged me to do the small stuff. It wasn't just about the grades I got. And that's why you see that mindset that is so prolific in some of those high achievers is like, I'm just here to show up and do my job. And if the win comes, the win comes. If not, then it doesn't. And that's okay.
Yeah, Alex Hormozy said a similar thing about that, about, loving the game of it. It's not about whether you win or whether you lose, or when you win or when you lose. It's that you get to get better at playing the game.
Right.
Because, the only end of the game of life is somewhere that we don't really want to ever be, right? That's death, and that's not great. So really, you don't want to be trying to achieve that if that's the end game. You want to get used to that process of the game, just get better at playing it the more you play.
That's right. And I'm going to throw this little saying in, but it's like, we've been trained to play a game that is underneath somebody else's rules, right? We're trying to win at a game that was established by somebody else. And I think a huge part of that is coming through the education system. We were taught how things were from a very young age of win or loss, pass or fail, and there was no in between. As a C and D student, I would love to tell you that I was applying myself consistently and I did learn a lot of stuff. And I had a real moment, and I'll share this for the first time with you. In second grade, I came home and was like, Mom, I don't want to do this school thing. For some reason, something feels off. It doesn't seem like it's going to be the end all be all for me. And I don't like how every single time I don't perform well on a test, I'm basically slapped on the wrist and everybody looks down on me. That created a lot of insecurity with me as I was coming up and becoming a man in general. And now that I'm older, I recognize that I was playing a game that was established by somebody else's rules, and I wasn't going to be able to win there. And now that I'm a little bit older, I can honestly say that I'm very proud of what I've accomplished. And I also didn't come from that schooling system. And my mom did a decent job. She still kind of got on me about bad grades, but I think I've done a better job of winning when it's underneath my rules and what I can apply to myself rather than the validation of some pre-established system.
That goes back to that super famous quote, right? Of, don't judge a fish by its ability to climb a tree.
Exactly.
Yeah.
100%.
Yeah.
100%.
It's interesting that the education system is something that I have an interesting relationship with. I don't want to downgrade the efforts of the education system and the people in it, because some of my biggest mentors growing up were my teachers, but the system itself isn't great. And it was introduced many years ago as it was paid for by like the Henry Fords, the Rockefellers, to create a society of people who would want to work a 9 to 5 in a job at a factory. It was created to make factory workers. And at the time, That's what society needed. We needed that to progress. It's why we are where we are now. But that's not where we as a society are anymore. But yet we're still fundamentally looking at our education system kind of in that way. I feel like we've gone way off of first and second place here, but yeah, it's.
I feel like it all ties together, though. Do you know what I mean? And you're going back to the exact point of like, what does second place look like? From where we all came from, odds are we were told that second place was a bad thing. You were never celebrated for getting, the second best score in the spelling bee. It was always the winner. You know what I mean? And so we've always demonized it. And so if we position our growth process and what we're learning and becoming better versions of ourselves as the journey, then you can fall in love with the process because it's always rewarding. You know what I mean? Like me and you create content a lot. And so often we fall trapped to the engagement game, the likes, the follows, the whatever it is. But I've tried to do a better job of falling in love with doing the work. Did I post today? Did I put something out that I'm passionate about? Yes. I guarantee you, if I stick with this for the next decade, I'm going to have a track record of success and confidence based on what I've been putting out there. And the world will come to me and people will vibe with me. You know what I mean? But it might not happen today. And I'm okay with that.
Yeah. And that comes full circle back to the perception thing, right? And it's that your perception is changing to a long game and changing to this is what's going to mean to you that you've won, so to speak. And there is no winning that game for you, for both of us, right?
Yeah.
There's no winning the content game. It's not going to happen. It doesn't matter how big of a post I do. It doesn't matter how big this podcast is going to be. That's not what winning is. And I'm sure for you, it's the same way. It's continually to provide value and to help people. That to me is as far as I have to worry about what winning is. And that game never ends.
That's right. It reminds me of a baseball saying. It's like, you're only as good as your next at bat. You know what I mean? It's like Alex Rodriguez. Let's go to Barry Bonds as an example, because everybody's familiar with him who could be listening today. Baseball player, amazing, home run king, had a lucrative, amazing season or career as a baseball player. Do we remember his 284th home run? No way. You laugh because I have no idea what it was either. You know what I mean? But he is an accumulation of the work that he put in consistently, which gave us the victory at the end. But it was showing up every single day and putting our best foot forward that contributes to your overall story of success. And I think that's super important.
Yeah. There's an interesting series of questions here that is populating the internet right now, but I've twisted it a little bit here. And I'm curious I want all of you listening to go through this mentally as I walk through this process. And you'll probably recognize it, but I've changed a few things. So we talked a lot about changing the understanding of winning and that you need to change that mindset in your brain. And gratitude is such a great way of doing this. So if I were to give you $10 million and a gold medal, would you be happy?
Absolutely.
Now, what if I was only going to give you $1 million and a silver medal, and you were going to watch me give that golden medal, that $10 million and the gold medal to somebody else? How would you feel then?
Still feel pretty solid, honestly.
Yeah. This is true, and you should, right? But for some people, they might be like, "Well, I want the 10 million and the gold, right?" Now, what would you feel like if you could have the gold and the $10 million, but you couldn't wake up tomorrow?
Couldn't take it,
right? And it puts it into perspective of just how important each day is. And now suddenly that silver and that $1 million, that seems like a pretty good deal. And I think that that's a really important thing for people to start to realize. You don't need the gold. You don't need the $10 million, right? You get up tomorrow and you be 1% better. And then you do it again. And you be grateful every day to have the chance to be 1% better.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's a perfect example of, the influence of other people's expectation for us, right? You're an athlete. You should try and win gold. That's great. But if you die the day after winning a gold, I guarantee the best players in the world would not be trying to win that championship. You know what I mean? They're just like, I just want to show up tomorrow. And so I think that's a great way to kind of reframe and get that good perspective. That is just so much more valuable than just the end goal. You know what I mean? And you and I have talked about this privately in the past. It's like, when you have a high achieving mindset or you want to be successful at your own right, you define what success is. Often we establish these finish lines that we want to cross the finish line. That was great. Where's the next one? Cross that finish line. Where's the next one? Always looking up towards the next thing, right? And that's a dangerous place to be in, because if you don't appreciate all of the steps that you've taken to be able to even run the race, you're never going to be fulfilled, because we're always chasing something that is incredibly fleeting.
Yeah. Yeah, I'd like to just encourage people to take those moments and change your perception. And part of the way to do that, I think, is through being grateful for what you have done and what you do have. I think that's a huge way to start to change your perception on what is winning and just be all right with second place. That's pretty freaking sweet.
Yeah. I mean, if we're talking about the difference between first and second, there's a lot of people who lost. That's for sure. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? We have to be appreciative for just being in the journey. And that's something I've always appreciated about you is your ability to call action towards the perspective that is truly fulfilling rather than just the chase of the thing. And when you and I have
Mm.
talked about in other episodes, you know what I mean? Like when we're chasing somebody else's unrealistic expectation for what we want, how we should look, the things that we should acquire, all of the success that's been determined for us. It's a dangerous game. It's really, really tough.
Yeah, it is. As always, guys, if something in this stood out to you, if there was something that we didn't cover properly, that we cruised over and missed an important topic on, do let us know. Me and Keenan are always looking to ways to improve. We just talked a lot about how it's winning the game for us, playing the game. So for us, part of that game is improvement. And so we would like to hear from you guys. How can we improve? And on top of that, what else should we be talking about? Maybe, there's an important topic that you're like, man, I need to hear more about this. Let us know in the comments. There'll be a question in the Spotify here. Hit the response to that, or hit us up on our socials. All the links to that are in here as well. Keenan, any last thoughts kind of on this topic about finishing second?
I just think you've done a masterful job of kind of directing today's conversation. I think we all have our own perception of what second place means to us. And often when we compare it to not winning gold or coming in first, it seems like it's not as sweet. But when you kind of deploy the perspective of, I was thinking about as you and I were talking here, the fact that you and I can hop on the internet on a Monday, have a conversation like this means that we are out of 7, 8 billion people. We're pretty far up in the pack. You know what I mean? There is a perspective of people who do not have clean water, don't have safety, don't have a warm bed to wake up in every single morning. And so if we deploy that perspective in our wins and losses, I think we're all pretty far ahead compared to where we could be.
That's a good way of putting it. That's a good way of putting that perspective twist on your entire life and what you're doing, not just the thing that you're competing for.
That's right.
So thank you for that, Keenan, at the end there. That's really good. I want to encourage everybody listening to remember that. Remember the perspective. Remember that each day is just about being a little bit better than you were the next day, and fall in love with the game, because ultimately it's getting better at playing it that really matters.
That's right. Thanks, man.
Thanks for listening, everybody, and we hope to catch you on the next one.